Hi, this is Dr. Adrienne. Welcome to Health Bite, the podcast where we explore all things health and wellness. Welcome back to Health Bite. I am extremely excited to be here today with Mrs. Jenny Goldfarb, who is a plant-based sensation right now in California. And welcome, Jenny.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that intro.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. I think what you're doing is phenomenal. And your story, from what I understand, is really extraordinary as well. I like to start the conversation talking about people's food stories, you know, how your food inspired your work and, you know, any kind of memories or traditions, celebrations. How did that inform your work and what you're doing right now?
Well, food is such an intimate thing for all of us. It's such a tremendous way that we get pleasure and that we connect. And for the Jewish culture, it's every bit as much. In fact, there's a famous saying that most of the Jewish holidays have to do with 5 words. Maybe it's 8. Seinfeld famously said it. They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. So there's this idea that we celebrate pretty much everything with food. And Jewish mothers in particular, like myself, are notorious for shoving whatever foods they can possibly shove down their throat, hopefully delicious ones. And so, yeah, there's a love of food that's innate in all of us and certainly in the Jewish culture. But I do come from a line of Jewish delicatessen owners. It was a very common job for immigrants in the pre-World War II time there, coming over, just barely making it, across the ocean to save their lives. And my great-grandfather came into Ellis Island and started working, didn't speak the language. He was a teenager and was not with his parents, 2 brothers that he came in with. So we think, Dr. Dean, we're doing wonderful things today. It's like what our families
It's awe-inspiring. It really is.
Awe-inspiring, yeah. So didn't speak the language, worked as a dishwasher. They used to, we would wash the dishes in the delis, and like the classic American dream came to own and operate several New York City delis and cafeterias. And then there were a couple, his son, my grandfather, and his son, my father, just became business people. But this deli corned beef pastrami was latent in my bloodstream, and anyway, had an emergence just recently.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And yet you went plant-based. So can you describe kind of what drove you and what inspired you to go into that direction?
Yeah, so I ate meat my whole life, from like anything you can imagine, really. And then I actually got into Judaism for some years, spent a year living in Jerusalem and decided to only eat kosher meat, which is pretty much every kind of meat, but not, pig products, but I was eating pretty much everything. They do a thing where they separate milk and dairy, which I later learned after taking on a plant-based experience, that these are the things that give life, milk, and that take life, meat. And so there's like a reason that they're not eaten together. And of course, in the vegan diet, they're not eaten at all. But what happened for me was I became a young mom about 5-6 years ago. And I had one friend on Facebook who started sharing some videos of and he was like a cool guy. He went to Cornell. He was a friend of my husband's. I just thought he was like cool. So he was somehow trickling into my newsfeed. I otherwise would never have ever want to click on a video like that. But I was like, can't possibly be as bad as I imagine it might, right? And every now and then I'd click on it, and I never shared the videos because I wanted to be a cool Facebook friend, but I cried, and I really changed the way I looked at food. And the more I investigated and saw and watched a couple documentaries, and once you click on a few videos, Facebook is like, okay, you're interested in this content, they share with you more. And it's truly heartbreaking and completely unacceptable. And the only reason this is going on is because it's so far behind closed doors. In fact, Paul McCartney has this famous line where he says, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be vegetarian. But as glass walls, Dr. Udine, YouTube. And more people like myself are seeing what's happening, and we're realizing it's not acceptable.
And so it sounds like food became, it's interesting with food, you kind of alluded to this at the beginning, that it is sustenance, right? The way we survive and how we fuel our bodies, but it symbolizes so much more, right? And activism and social change is one of the things that food can symbolize. And so it sounds like that's very much paired with, your work and your decision making.
Yeah, well, I believe like in a kind of from my spiritual backing, I believe in like an integrated, almost holographic kind of system where like, if you're doing this thing to these animals causing so much, to them, like number one, it's heartbreaking, but also what comes out of that karmically or energetically, like it isn't doing good for you. You're putting these kind of, things that were tortured and killed off then in your body when you could be eating something that's alive. So it was like I wound up seeing it on multiple levels. It started off with just videos of cruelty, and then I realized, wow, this can't be really doing my body good. But that then presented a whole host of problems because I was married to a very meat and potatoes husband. I still am, fortunately, and I had two young kids at the time, and they were like, I don't want to eat any of that food. Like, and I also had no experience in cooking any of that food when I say plant-based foods. So I dealt with the back-breaking labor of learning to cook from the produce and grains aisle. And boy, we Americans have no experience in this. We know how to put a piece of chicken in the oven with a little salt and maybe an herb if we're fancy and pull it out 30 minutes later. So I'm coming at this like nowheresville, but I started cooking and I had to really make him happy quickly. So I had to get my stuff together fast and my two little kids who only want chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. And after a lot of very, very bad meals, the food started getting a little good, a little better, and every now and then exceptionally delicious. And I said to my husband, I want to share this with the world. I want to show people this is doable and delicious. You could be a busy mom. I was also working a handful of hours a day, and you can still put these meals together, and you can cook using food that is alive, that gets the kids sick less often, that helps you lose a few pounds. All the stuff, the skin's a little better, all the stuff. But I was in it initially for the animals, and then I saw all the repercussions. But so I started a food blog, and every week I was putting out a new recipe to try and show how doable and delicious it could be. It was a video recipe blog. It's still up. It's countyourcolors.com. And for that, I had to come up with a new recipe every week. And so I realized after a while, there were a lot of delicious plant-based burgers, and there were a lot of ways to make, veggies yummy, but there was no classic New York style corned beef pastrami, what my great grandpa, would have been proud to know was still in the lineage after all that time. So I set out to recreate it, and I just thought it was going to be another recipe I was going to share on my blog.
So before you get to that, because that is our main attraction, I feel like, I want to extract every bit of juice I can out of you. Because this whole concept of cooking veggies and plant-based, it is really difficult, but it is something that people are interested in. Even people who are not interested in going completely vegan or vegetarian, there is a calling for, veggie light or plant-based light. I want to know a little bit more about was it just trial and error, or how did you get yourself from being this self-admitted not so good chef to creating these delicious meals? What was there a process? Was there a class? How did you go about that?
The process was I started getting some different cookbooks, but it actually starts, there's one group on Facebook called Mercy for Animals, and they'll put out undercover investigations, which you don't have to watch, you have to uncover it if you're even going to view it, but they'll also put out, hey, it's Thanksgiving, here are 9 dishes you can make that are going to blow everyone's pants off. And so I started seeing, there are ways to use this and that, and nuts to make dairy, and whatever ways to mimic meat kind of dishes. And after a while, I got a few different cookbooks, and friends were buying them for my birthdays for me. It was clearly what I was excited about. And, and even still, there were some bad meals, and then there were some really excellent ones. And I realized how much I felt the not just the need, but actually the just the purpose to have to share these.
Right. I like that. The purpose, it seems, as always, right? It drives drives the process and the evolution. So it was trial and error and kind of an organic evolution. So then you're cooking away these recipes of kale to a meat and potatoes guy, and then
Mhm.
how did that turn into corned beef? Corned beef,
Well,
not corned beef.
sometimes, when you get like pushback in life, it actually can be the greatest, way that a door opens. So in
Absolutely.
this case, right, Dr. Uzium, anyone who's worked hard and overcome big challenges knows that. So in this case, my in-laws were very big haters of what I was up to. I mean, number one, it's kind of the one diet that really challenges people because it makes the other person feel like culpable that they're up to like no good or something. It really hurts people's
There's
feelings.
judgment. I think that there's a sense that there's judgment there.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a lot of judgment, right? It's judgment the other way too,
Yes.
and it's unfortunate because it's anyway, it stops people from being open to maybe looking into it because it puts defenses up. So anyway, my in-laws certainly felt that way, but they also felt like I was pulling their son and their grandchildren along for this crazy hippie ride that maybe was going to leave them nutrient deficient and without muscles and whatever. So they, there's still an extent they come visit, they bring some cheeses, whatever. I mean, there's still like, it's not like, this, but, when they would come visit, they saw what I was feeding them and what I was cooking up, and they were like poo-pooing a lot of it. My mother-in-law would say, "How are you getting your calcium?" No problem. Let me tell you, more calcium-rich plants than there are animals. Don't worry, And I do my best.
A cup of broccoli has the same amount of calcium as a cup of milk, right? So
That's why we're on with the doctor right now. Mic drop. So basically, I got a lot of, pushback from them. And so when I created this recipe for the corned beef, which again, I thought I was just going to share on my blog like any other recipe, they tasted it. And they're former New Yorkers. And they said, "This is delicious. This tastes like corned beef. This I love. This has 14 grams of protein and 2 ounces. This is made with beets and chickpea. This is amazing." And I, wow, maybe there's something to this one. Because I previously thought some of the other ones were that good, but to hear it from them,
there's a validation there.
Yeah, and it was actually my mother-in-law who said, "Mrs. Goldfarb's corned beef, like you sound like a 75-year-old Jewish bubby that's a grandma, and that weighs like 200 pounds, and not." So that was sort of she thought of that, and I really have to credit them tremendously.
Wow,
for
that's
fantastic. Yeah.
I want to go back to this idea of judgment and because you're right. I think that there is a lot of people feel alienated from doing something that they may want to do or want to try. And in full disclosure, we eat everything almost in our home, but we're very health conscious, obviously, and primarily plant-based for health purposes, although we don't avoid meat. I do have a almost 16-year-old who has gone pescatarian. And so,
right, because we're watching YouTube.
Yes. Well, and they're educated and they are savvy and they are active in their communities and in their environment. So I'm very proud of that. But I think that I want you to kind of address, how would you speak to those people who say, "Look, I don't want to abstain completely. I see where you're coming from. I see the health benefits. I'd like to incorporate that." What's your message to those folks?
Well, I'm married to one of those folks,
Yeah.
so the message happens like 4 times a day, and I'd say the message is to get as close as you can to eating more and more foods that are alive. You're going to see that it makes you feel physically good. You're going to know that you're putting, positive things for both the earth, the animals, yourself into your body. And the proof is in the pudding. So, as much as you can, whenever you can, do it. Colorful foods, foods that are even more raw than cooked. I mean, there's so many levels to this. I'm sure Dr. Udim. So, but to whatever extent you can incorporate more plant-based, do it.
Right. And I think that that's a good point to kind of advocate for not having this all or nothing approach, because I think that kind of disempowers people. When they feel like they have to be perfect in order to do something, it kind of throws them off track. So I like that, having a more moderate, do what you can, do the best you can approach. And that's how it goes with all of our health guidance, right? Like, you don't have to be a marathon runner in order to achieve benefits from movement, right? Any amount of movement is helpful and supports your body. The more the better, but get started somewhere, right?
Yeah, well, from a health perspective, get started somewhere. From an animal cruelty factor, unfortunately, you can't say
Correct.
any amount is actually okay, but but still get started somewhere, because this will lead to more and more.
And of
And
course, if you look at it from a population basis, if everybody adopts a more plant approach, even if it's not exclusive, it will have a positive impact on that as well. So even in that regard, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
a new stat just came out that the Impossible Whopper has saved 250,000 cows in just this past
Yeah,
year.
it's
So
incredible. Yeah. So you
just
can
one
make big strides with small changes. Yeah. So I like to go back a little bit to your Jewish background. I have to tell you, I have you beat, because not only do I have a Jewish background, but also a Persian background. So food is
Ooh.
being has been shoved, in every which way and form.
Double threat, love
Yes,
it.
right. And then, but now as a mother and also as a physician who really works with food and works at the other end of the spectrum, which is people who who are suffering from excess weight, and 70% of the population is overweight, and many of them have health problems as a result. And so I try hard to reconcile this whole concept of food is love, as well as food is fuel, particularly when it comes to my children. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that, and how is that something you consider, and how you hold that in your mind?
Well, as I said, I have, a bit of a Jewish background in terms of Jewish spirituality, and there's a lot around food that if we, can sort of, honor it properly. There are actually blessings that are said around all different kinds of foods. Actually, what's interesting is that there's a blessing for grains, for fruits, for vegetables, for wine, for bread, and then everything that's like cheese, fish, meat, chicken, fruit roll-ups, like all that is one other, like everything else umbrella. So little indication to me that the stuff that you're really saying, thank you God for growing this thing from the earth, like apparently there are 18,000 edible fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, herbs, seeds, and most of humanity are eating the same 3 animals for most of their meals. So there's a whole world out there, and am I not answering the question? Remind me
No,
the
I love
question.
everything you're saying. And how do you bring all of this to your children and your child rearing into your home?
Well, we do Shabbat every Friday night. I'm very big on that. I work super hard. I sit at the desk, like I pick my kids up from school. I'm still at the desk. And I tell them on Friday night, on Saturday, that's it. We're turning things off, and we sit at the Shabbat table. And what happens? It's not like overly religious, but we say a blessing on the wine. We say a blessing on the bread. We talk about our week a little bit. The kids are young. We're mostly like grab a napkin, do that. But whatever, we sit together at least. And yeah, I mean, there's also, a lot of discussion about, talking about eating foods that, don't hurt animals. My kids are now, today's my daughter's 7th birthday, and I
Ah,
also have
happy
a
birthday to your
5-year-old.
daughter.
Thank you. Thank you. And I tell them, when they say, why can't we have the egg and the fried rice? I say, one day you're going to know why mommy's doing all this crazy stuff, so that's sort of how I leave it with them. But yeah, so in terms of like knowing that like this food like comes from the earth, and having a cognizance of this and being thankful for that, and taking a second. Actually, my 7-year-old Willow just asked me the other day. She said, "Oh, like, how does the food like get to Ralph's?" She's like, "What's the backstory?" It's like, I love that you asked me. Let's go. And then, like, we talked about how it goes, from a farm, how it's sometimes in a facility, from the earth, how it just comes about, and the miraculousness of all of that.
Yeah, that's
So we're actually
wonderful.
coming up we're less than a month away from a holiday known as Tu B'Shvat, which is the New Year of the trees, when everything is like dark and everything's cold and there's no flowers budding and nothing's happening. The sap starts to rise from inside, and the trees become alive, and the cycle begins again. So we can't take any of this stuff for granted.
No, absolutely not. And you brought up this point that I like to talk about, that I love, which is being around the table, right? Bringing your kids around the table, food being a way of bringing family together, which is so ingrained, as you said, in the Jewish culture. And something that's actually ingrained in many cultures, in Middle Eastern cultures, in Japanese cultures. I shared with one of our guests several weeks ago that I had spent the summer, took my family to Japan, and they actually, in certain provinces, have a law in which you're not allowed to eat while you're walking. And there's actually, I know, also a Jewish law that says the same, that you should be sitting around the table. And yet,
with bread and with certain foods,
right?
Yeah, I think.
And yet, as Americans, being a born and raised American, it's a struggle, right? Keeping families at the table. So, and your kids are still young, so you can strap them down a little bit. But talk more about that, about maybe how that came about. Is there something in your history or your background that aligns you to that goal of sitting around the table? I'd like to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm interested in general spirituality and living well, I mean, I've seen studies on, eye contact, being together, experiences versus things, and screen time. This is screen time. My kids are 7 and 5. These things are so dazzling to us as well. And my husband is a television editor, so he's like an old, he thinks TV is like part of, how we teach them Torah, we teach them TV, So anyway, we have a little compromise. He shows them old movies early in the morning during sort of his hours, and then for the whole rest of the day, there's really no screen action unless it's like a FaceTime with a grandma. So there's shows on. They come home from school. Boredom is encouraged. Let them be in the living room and have nothing to do and have to figure stuff out. And then, so it just makes it that sitting around the table is totally exciting. It's more exciting than being in the living room by yourself. So yeah, I think once you start competing with the screens, it's very hard to wrangle the kids around that table, especially if you allow the screens at the table. Try not to do that. But either way, yeah, once it's mealtime, I mean, everyone's hungry, and I can't claim that we have the deepest conversations at this point in time, like you and I are having right now. But
you're planting seeds. You're planting seeds for sure. Seeds. Yes. Exactly. I'm in Los Angeles. Aren't you in California as well?
Los Angeles as well.
Okay, I need to have you over for Shabbat. I have to say, my Persian cooking incorporates some meat, but my daughter's challenging me, and actually tonight I promised to make a stew sans meat.
I'll bring the corned beef, and my husband will have whatever. So fine.
So Jenny, you recently had an exciting, speaking about screens and TV, right? You had a exciting sighting on Shark Tank. Tell us, as a entrepreneur, what made you go there? What was the process? And tell us a little bit about your experience.
So I started this business, and I live in Los Angeles. And after I started selling it to a few delis, a number of friends who were also sort of TV industry type of folk said to me, "You got to bring this on Shark Tank. It's a no-brainer. This Jewish girls peddling around little samples of corned beef to the owners of these delis and trying to make a splash in the deli world. Splashes hadn't been made in the deli world since, the 1890s. They were like something." So I filled in, it's like a 25-second long web query. It takes nothing to just get it in there, the little application. And then they checked out the website, apparently. I was driving home on the 101 from a Netflix meeting, because we got into a couple of movie studios. My husband, who's an TV industry guy, was like, "Get into the movie studios. That'll make you cool." All right, fine. I went to Fox, I went to Netflix. So those folks get to eat it. But I'm driving home from that meeting, and I got a phone call from the casting director. "We're interested to bring you on. You have to submit a video, and then we'll let you know within 2 weeks." I submit the video. They called me the next day. They're like, "We're putting you on the next rounds." I wound up going from casting and working with producers to being actually on the show within 1 month.
Wow.
Which is sort of crazy, yeah. And I was asking for $100,000 for 10% of the business, and I was willing in my mind to give up 30% because I wanted to make a deal and have a shark and have all this cool experience. And so I went through a series of questioning that honestly was not even that difficult. I felt like the spirit was like with me. Funny, we had a friend of ours who was on the show once. I said to him, how do I prepare for this? And he goes, you have a baby and you have 2 kids. Hold your baby while she's screaming, while your 2 kids are fighting. Have your husband ask you financial questions. If you can handle that, you'll be fine in the tank.
Great advice.
That's sort of how I prepare. That's how you just have to prepare for everything. And this is the power of the woman, you know? And I got out there and it was easy. The hardest part was like giving the pitch over, because it's like you're like in drama class and like the biggest moment of the school play. And then you go into like sort of finance, and then you go into history and all these different subjects. It's like the biggest final exam of your life. But yeah, I came out where Mr. Wonderful Kevin O'Leary made me an offer for $100,000 for 20%. That was my first offer. So I'm thinking in my mind, I just won this whole show. And then Mark Cuban said, I'm going to make this real easy. I also want 20%, but I'll give you $250,000. And Mark Cuban, you got yourself a deal.
So exciting. And how has that impacted? It was relatively new, but has that already impacted your work and your distribution or your presence?
Yeah, good question. I email him, activities and things that are happening each week. And, I write him these like long glowing emails. And he sends back
yeah.
Yeah. So, but he's got a team under him that I'm able to access for sales and all different things. And then I can see him on emails to like open big doors. So, I'm still uncovering what like a lot of the value is, but it's exciting. It's exciting to have the name. He also happens to be Jewish. He recently went vegetarian. He mentioned to me on the show during the taping, although it didn't make it to air, that his family, when they came through Ellis Island, also worked in the Lower East Side delis scene. So it feels like a really beautiful story.
Yeah,
in fact,
nice alignment, right?
In fact, speaking of alignment, one of the principles in Judaism is on reincarnation. People think of it like this, like kind of Eastern idea, but it's like a completely Judeo-Christian idea. And it occurred to me, just perhaps because his family was in the Lower East Side deli scene, but also formerly was in Romania. He actually said that on the air, which is where my family came from. And
incredible.
It made me think, maybe in some past lives, someone owed someone something, and then they repaid it a little bit in New York and the Lower East Side, but they had to come here to have this to fully culminate it. So we never know the underpinnings.
I mean, even if you think of it from a biological standpoint, if you trace back far enough, you very well could have had some commonality in your background. So on so many levels, there's connection there.
Yes.
And we talked, this has been a great conversation, by the way. So thank you. I've really enjoyed hearing about your story and your passion. And as always, when somebody's truly passionate about something and working with purpose, it's beautiful how the universe conspires in your success, right? So congratulations to you. And
Thank you.
And so I want to end with this question, which is very personal to me. And I think a lot of listeners are also would be intrigued to know, which is this whole issue of time. I feel like time is the primary boundary that people experience in their lives, in making time for family. So, it's a boundary to connection, in making time for food and health and for themselves, particularly mothers. I always thought that as a working person that time was a challenge, but come to know that so many of my friends and family who are not working outside of the home, but working exclusively in the home, have even more of a difficult time to find that time for themselves. So you're a mom of 3, you're an entrepreneur, right? You're actively engaged in your own personal well-being and health. How do you make time to fit food in and to really give it the intention that you do?
In full disclosure, since I've had a young baby and have been working so hard in this business, there's been a lot of takeout. a lot of vegan takeout, but a lot of takeout, which I don't love for a number of reasons. There's oftentimes a lot of oil and extra salt than you would normally cook for yourself. And so also, not to mention a lot of garbage and far more money. So there are a lot of reasons I don't like that, but it's the corner that I've cut in order to kind of keep everything else, in flow. And it's a strange truth that I've actually shared with a number of others in the industry, which is I used to cook dinner every night for my family, and now that I'm in the food business, I don't cook anymore. But I feel, that this mission of feeding folks this delicious food, further and wider. Just the other day, we delivered 2 pallets, which was like 3,000 pounds. I used to drive across town to deliver 20 pounds. Now it's like big 18-wheelers are coming. It's, so that takes the place of, the shortcut that is happening here with my family. But it is a bit of a New Year's resolution to try and do a little more cooking. And I certainly know hacks and, 12-minute dinners that can happen. Those exist, and a couple of them are actually on my little food blog of mine. If you want to Google 15-minute vegan dinners, there are many of them out there. So yeah, it's a balancing act. No one's got it right,
Absolutely.
We're all winging it,
yes,
right?
And I think, Jenny, that's such a generous admission on your part, because people who know your story and who hear you may have this idea that you've got the apron on every day, and the reality is that everybody has to make do with what they have, and to go back to what we were saying before, that it doesn't have to be perfect, right? It can be a 10-minute dinner, it can be every other night, as long as you have the intention of making it work.
Yeah,
So,
perfection actually, really bites you in the ass. We really have to be willing to put out, the messy version in order to have success at anything new. So, yeah.
right, and it's an evolution, right? It's a
Sure.
process. So thanks again, Jenny. It's been wonderful to have you, and congratulations on your successes so far. And we wish you more growth, more abundance, more success, and keep us posted.
Amen. And thank you so much for being such a light and a lovely person and a fabulous interviewer. Everyone's so lucky who gets to hear a little slice of you each week.
Thank you.